been reading again the biography of St. John Vianney, and in one part it says, "The saints are sublimely eccentric." I like that, because it's very true. The fact is, you read the lives of the saints, and you're like, these people are a little nuts. Because what they do is they take a part of the gospel and they live it radically, especially religious founders. And not everyone's called to live like that, but to a select few, God gives a very radical grace. If they're meant to start a movement, they need a lot of grace. And what we see happening in the life of St. Romuald is this necessary grace to reform religious life. Because in the time of the 10th century, religious life was in shambles. It was really bad. You think it's bad now? No, it was way worse in the 10th century. And the monks were basically, as depraved as everybody else, sometimes even more so. The Benedictine order and others had become comfortable, right? They'd already been established and they were wealthy. A lot of the monasteries were very wealthy, and so the monks, they lived better than a lot of the people did. And so what happened is St. Romuald, of course, he grew up in a very wealthy family, and his father was a very vicious man. His father murdered a relative in a duel. And St. Romuald was so scandalized by this that he fled to a monastery to do penance for his dad. Right? He never wanted to imitate the sins of his father. He left the life of the court. He left the rich, noble life, and he entered a monastery and wanted to give his life completely to Jesus. But after a couple of years of living in the monastery, he realized this is not the way that we're supposed to live. And so he left the monastery to go be a hermit. Now, of course, when you're wanting to be a hermit, right, you go and you find other hermits. Now, they don't want to be found, right, because they're hermits, okay? But he found one who, of course, was a very, saintly man. We find that sainthood tends to come in pairs. You tend to be master, disciple, handed on. So he found this hermit, and they had a kindred spirit, and so they both went to just live in the desert and pray. And they did so for several years. And then finally, he founded a monastery with a bunch of cells. The Camaldolese are a very strict order. There's only about 100 of them today in existence, right? Because they're very, very, very much a very particular way of living out this part of the gospel. When you pray, go to your inner room, close the door, and pray to your Father in secret. They're not there to win the praise of the world. They're there to pray and to offer penance for the world. And the Lord rewards them abundantly. And so he founded this monastery and then went and founded others. And he founded several monasteries around Europe. And he's a contemporary of St. Alice. So St. Alice's grandson, Otto III, appointed him the abbot of a particular monastery. And he did that for a couple of years. And then, of course, he went back to being a hermit. And we see he trained when people came to him, because, of course, sanctity is attractive, people went out to the desert to find him. People went out into the wilderness to find him and to be edified by his spiritual direction. He had the gift of prophecy. Many miracles happened around him, but he, of course, fled all attention to live in solitude because he just wished to pray and spend his life in reparation for sin. And not just his own father's sins, but also as he recognized the sins of religious brothers who were not living their consecration. And so many people looked to him as an inspiration, but of course many people thought he was crazy, as always happens, right? They thought the Lord was crazy too, right? And so the fact of the matter is we see that he was a man in love with the Lord and really wished to pray and to do great mortification and penance. As St. Peter Damian, who was inspired by him, St. Peter Damian was one of the great reformers of the 10th and 11th centuries of the clergy. He continued St. Romuald's behavior and witness, and he looked to him and he said, when he died, it was one of those things where he knew the day of his death. He had had a prophetic intuition of the day of his death, and he just went and said, I don't want to be bothered. I'm going to the wilderness to die. Basically, he made a cell in this new monastery, and he said, leave me. I'm going to die. And he said he was burdened less by illness than just extreme old age, right? And we just see that he offered himself to God. He told his monks, leave, come back in the morning and say morning prayer. But the monks, they didn't think he would live the night. And so they waited in vigil outside of his room, and they were just listening. And then when they heard that his breathing had stopped, they went in and they found him just peacefully there offering himself to God. And St. Peter Damian says he was like the neglected heavenly pearl that would soon find its place in the heavenly treasure house. Right? Beautiful example. So we see every single saint in the church, they have a particular purpose. They're to reveal a particular part. St. Francis, he reveals the poverty of Jesus, right? What does St. Romuald do? He reveals that place of what does a life given over to prayer and solitude and silence do for a soul? He formed many people who came to him, several missionaries who went and converted Russia and Poland and other places. And so you find that it's not the job of a saint to do everything. It's the job of a saint to do one thing and to do it supremely well. And that's really important for us because it's important for me because I like to do a lot of things. And it's just like, ugh! You can't do everything, but what is the one thing God has given you to do? If you will listen to him and you will follow the one thing you're supposed to do, then you will be a great saint. St. Romuald, pray for us.